Let me try to do this for the third time. Interruptions every time. Anyways, the original link to the Bearded Heretic will be in the pinned description box or in the description box in the pinned comment. All right, pay attention, folks. This is pretty good. Yep.
Okay, Milton Friedman, if you are made dictator for one day, the next day the American government...
No, I don't want to be made dictator.
You wouldn't?
I don't believe in dictators.
Okay.
I believe we want to bring about change by the agreement of the citizens. I don't believe in arbitrary rule.
Let me put it this way then.
If we can't persuade the public that it's desirable to do these things, we have no right to impose them, even if we had the power to do it.
Proponents of the Great Reset argue that the pandemic proves our former society doesn't work. So we need a tech-focused, sustainable future to reduce emissions and thereby save the planet.
I now have the pleasure to welcome the World Economic Forum. It is the cradle of some of our prominent organizations that are here with us today. It is the place, for example, where CEPI was founded, and it is a main link to the private sector. With us is Professor Klaus Schwab on video.
The World Economic Forum is now very much engaged into this initiative of shaping a great reset for the post-corona era.
The Great Reset is a rebranded, tightened-up version of the UN decades-old Sustainable Development Agenda, also known as Agenda 21.
This year's lockdowns have caused emissions to fall dramatically, but emissions are already rising again, in some places surpassing pre-COVID levels.
The same policies and ideas are contained in the Green New Deal, which was defeated in 2019 in the U.S. Congress.
People are dying. This is serious.
Will vote on the long-shot Green New Deal resolution. That measure failed.
On this vote, the yeas are 0, the nays are 57.
It bears repeating. 6 months before SARS-CoV-2 was discovered by China, the UN and the World Economic Forum signed a strategic partnership specifically to advance the Sustainable Development Agenda, now known as the Great Reset.
But under your leadership, Secretary General, we have together advanced another important milestone last year in establishing a strategic partnership framework between the United Nations and the World Economic Forum.
Klaus Schwab has been openly fighting against Milton Friedman-style economics for decades, ever since Friedman published his famous 1970 essay, "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits."
That's why this year's forum sees the launch of a new Davos manifesto, and it's a powerful opportunity to change business as usual. While the Western liberal economic order has reaped huge benefits, it's been too narrowly focused on the interests of shareholders. That's why the forum is pushing for stakeholder capitalism, a model where corporations are oriented to benefit not just shareholders, but all stakeholders: customers, suppliers, employees, local communities. And this isn't just some fantasy idea that only benefits consumers. It's got major buy-in from serious economists, the big four accounting firms, and the banking sector.
Innovation historically has been the result of a collective effort.
Schwab now predicts that the COVID-19 pandemic, which he says will last at least until 2022, will mark the final death knell of neoliberalism, which he defines as a corpus of ideas and policies favoring competition over solidarity, creative destruction over government intervention, and economic growth over social welfare. Others would describe neoliberalism as decentralized power and smaller government, and Schwab's preferred system as China under Xi Jinping. How long has Schwab known that a pandemic could be used to advance his ideals?
We are coming out, thanks also to the leadership of China in terms of fighting the pandemic, in terms of reinvigorating its economy. We have now a window of opportunity to create this global reset which we all need.
A while. if his publications and planning exercises are any indication. His book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, contains lengthy discourse on how pandemics are known agents for major societal shifts. He asks, why should COVID-19 be any different? Then there's the fact that Schwab's organization practiced a high-level pandemic exercise in October 2019, less than 5 months before COVID-19 came along.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
The World Economic Forum's co-sponsors for this event were the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, both of which have actively promoted 2020's unprecedented pandemic response. As Imperial College London's Neil Ferguson recently explained, lockdowns were not recommended by any government until Xi Jinping changed what was possible by proclaiming, "This worked for us in China."
How have we managed to get in such a position that we basically have no idea how to get out of it?
I actually think you can turn that question around. I think it's quite remarkable, and China showed the way, that we have basically stopped a highly transmissible respiratory virus in its tracks.
This extraordinarily fortuitously timed pandemic planning exercise makes Schwab look like something of an oracle. Indeed, he openly brags about his foresight. For years, international organizations like the World Health Organization, institutions like the World Economic Forum, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and individuals like Bill Gates have been warning us about the next pandemic risk, even specifying that it would emerge in a highly populated place where economic development forces people and wildlife together, that it would spread quickly and silently by exploiting networks of human travel and trade, and that it would reach multiple countries by thwarting containment. In 2017, Anthony Fauci made a similar prediction.
But also there will be a surprise outbreak, and I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation you will understand why history, the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID, will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
Like Schwab, Fauci actively promotes lockdowns. Like Schwab, he declares that we can never again return to normal. If we do, we should expect diseases to constantly jump from animals to humans, because pandemics never happened until 2020, when the world grew too industrialized. To save ourselves, we must redesign society in harmony with nature. Both Fauci and Schwab's prose are littered with terms like sustainability, inclusiveness, green, nature, and harmony. Terms that are hard to disagree with, although the behaviors supposedly promoting them are a harder sell. Schwab reveals in his Great Reset book that our new germ-avoidant behaviors are seen as optimal to the environment.
Amazing grace.
During lockdowns, many consumers previously reluctant to rely too heavily on digital applications and services were forced to change their habits almost overnight. Many of the tech behaviors that we were forced to adopt during confinement will, through familiarity, become more natural. If health considerations become paramount, we may decide, for example, that a cycling class in front of a screen at home is safer and cheaper. The same reasoning applies to many different domains, like flying to a meeting. Zoom is safer, cheaper, greener, and much more convenient. Driving to distant family gathering for the weekend. The WhatsApp family group is not as fun, but again, safer, cheaper, and greener. Or even attending an academic course. Not as fulfilling, but cheaper and more convenient. Spelling this out for those too stunned to take it in. This is an open admission that it benefits Schwab and Fauci's political agenda to continue lockdowns as long as possible. The same people who sell interminable lockdowns by ignoring great science on pre-existing immunity, lack of asymptomatic spread, and flawed tests, believe the lockdowns are the perfect agent to usher in the changes they desire.
And the time to act is now.
Will they succeed? Is their behavior remotely justified? Does the pandemic really prove our society is fatally flawed? Why can't they use the political system to gain majority votes if their agenda is so good?
Because we're all in this together, so help us build a fairer world.
As kids, what can we do right now?
Because it is not immediately easy to become in the wealthy class. There are certain parts of the system which make that virtually impossible for the real person. Now, I believe that this freedom too represents the belief in equality as opposed to liberty. And I wonder, is it possible to build a system based on this equality, which I believe that many people agree in, and would not be willing to sacrifice to the liberty of freedom from?
Well, I'm not going to be able to give a full answer to your question because you've asked a very, very complex question, and so you're going to have to pardon me if I am a little dogmatic. But I only want to suggest that the statements I'm making are not without some thought and reason behind them. In my opinion, a society that aims for equality before liberty will end up with neither equality nor liberty. And a society that aims first for liberty will not end up with equality, but it will end up with a closer approach to equality than any other kind of system that has ever been developed. Now, that conclusion is based both on evidence from history, across history, and also, I believe, on reasoning which, if you try to follow through the implications of aiming first at equality, will become clear to you. You can only aim at equality by giving some people the right to take things from others. And what ultimately happens when you aim at equality is that A and B decide what C shall do for D. Except that they take a little bit of a commission off on the way.
Important story. The important story. In the midst of COVID-19, it's an historic opportunity to look at the facts of the world as it is, and then to focus on the solutions to some of our greatest problems. In the 75 years since the United Nations was founded, the human race has never had to face a set of challenges like we do right now. But together, we can overcome them.
It's a myth that each and every one of us doesn't have the ability to change the world dramatically and quickly. There have been enormous shifts in power and behavior to the benefit of all humanity, and it can happen again.
Nelson Mandela said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." These are some of the things that must be done.
COVID-19 is the first major pandemic in 6 decades. Worse pandemics occurred in 1918, 1957, and 1968, when the population was exponentially smaller, and carbon emissions were not even on anyone's radar. Because pandemics have always occurred, there is no logical basis, not even a flimsy one, to infer that population growth, climate change, or industrialization caused this one. People may or may not agree with Schwab that Zoom meetings are preferable to in-person work, that sitting in the same house every day of the week is preferable to commuting to an office, that local entertainment is better than international travel, that exercise classes are just as good over the computer screen as they are in a studio. But there is one thing most people agree with: being told that germs threaten your existence when they really do not is abusive. Scaring people into their homes, making them fear their own family and friends, preying on their vulnerabilities, shattering their social existences, especially when you knowingly do this in hopes of making it permanent, is just about as bad as human behavior gets. Just as bad, Schwab and Company know the lockdowns are taking out certain industries while sparing others. In a nutshell, the powerful survive. Anyone who has both this knowledge and the ability to influence lockdown duration has an unthinkable level of power and an unlimited ability to amass more of it by manipulating pretty much the entire global financial system. All of this is eminently predictable by the people encouraging, supporting, and imposing the restrictive orders. The restaurant sector of activity has been hit by the pandemic, lockdown, to such a dramatic extent that it may never come back. In France and the UK, several industry voices estimate that up to 75% of independent restaurants might not survive the lockdowns and subsequent social distancing measures. The large chains and fast food giants will. This in turn suggests that big business will get bigger while the smallest shrink or disappear. A large restaurant chain, for example, has a better chance of staying operational as it benefits from more resources and ultimately less competition in the wake of bankruptcies among smaller outfits.
Now, when we look at COVID, I think we should distinguish between 3 phases. We have 3 R's. Restrain, which means to fight the virus, the hot phase. Most countries are in today. Then we have recover, to go back to a kind of new normal. And finally, the reset, which means to define and to design the strategies which should lead us in the after-corona phase. What is the objective? What kind of world do we want to build? What do we know? What did we learn? I think the world which we want to create with the Great Reset has to be much more resilient. It has to be because security, people will demand more security, physical security, health security. It will have to be more inclusive. We had already a big gap before the crisis started. This gap will be tremendously increased. So if we want to avoid some kind of social revolutions, and we have seen the signs of anger on the streets already the last weeks, so we have to address this issue to create a stronger inclusiveness. And finally, more sustainable, because we know now that the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
Knowingly taking out small business, one of the last bastions of free speech and independence, distinguishable from the tightly controlled corporate world, is evil. It is hard to believe that anyone would do it if they could avoid it. However, it is equally hard to ignore the fact that Florida, Georgia, South Dakota, Texas, and Sweden, among many others, have fully open economies and average mortality to show for it. Both public health ethics and the Syracuse principles dictate that the least restrictive means must be used when public health is given as a justification for restricting basic human rights, such as the right to earn a living. Yet Schwab and Fauci both ignore Sweden and Florida and claim that COVID-19 lockdown restrictions must continue until 2022 or longer. How on earth do they justify it? They seem to be telling themselves, and may even truly believe, that they are saving the planet, so the ends justify the means. In his book, Schwab poses the rhetorical question, is it okay to lie to the public for some greater good? Well, I would respond, who should we trust to decide what is the greater good? There will never be unified agreement on which system achieves this end. Some will vote Milton Friedman, some Klaus Schwab. Most everyone, however, would agree that tricks like exploiting pandemics should not be used, even by one's own side. Reasonable people may well believe in the merit of Schwab's stakeholder economy, but they undoubtedly expect to be persuaded of its merit, not to have the system foisted on them by ruse.
We need a new way of thinking on climate, on inequality, on health. Because the way we're doing things just isn't working well enough. The world is in crisis. And not just because of the last few months, not just because of COVID-19, but because of the last few decades, and because of us.
The democratic process exists so ideas can be openly hashed out, debated, and settled by the public. Each person allotted one vote.
If we can't persuade the public that it's desirable to do these things, we have no right to impose them, even if we had the power to do it.
Schwab quite openly admits that he would like to dispense with this process. It is not producing the results he desires. Far from it. Recent populist movements in the US, Make America Great Again, and the UK, Brexit, have specifically rejected his collectivist ideals. Without greater collaboration, we will be unable to address the global challenges that we collectively face. Put in the simplest possible terms, if as human beings we do not collaborate to confront our existential challenges, the environment, and the global governance freefall, among others, we are doomed. In his Great Reset marketing book, Schwab threatens that the rising tide of nationalism will prove incompatible with the United States dollar's status as global reserve currency. He suggests that an alternative currency will be needed, that a global digital currency is eventually going to arrive, and that China is years ahead of the rest of the world in developing one.
Huang Dan just paid with a new type of money at this pharmacy. That's because China's paper cash is going digital. The digital yuan is meant to be faster than using credit or debit cards on digital wallets like Apple Pay. Plus, there are other incentives, like zero transaction fees for merchants, and one day it'll even work offline. But one major difference is that the digital yuan is 100% trackable by China's central bank. And when it's launched nationwide, it could impact not only citizens, but also foreign companies operating in the country.
This makes the WEF annual meeting a cost-effective brainstorming event, which I would like to call Schwab Economics.
Although he doesn't say so directly, Schwab undoubtedly dislikes what Trump had been doing to defend the dollar. The security premium enjoyed by the US dollar could diminish because the US is disengaging from global geopolitics in favor of more standalone, inward-looking policies. Predictably, Schwab makes the argument that these same nationalist policies proved disastrous during the pandemic. Echoing the WHO's praise of China's collectivist action in Wuhan.
The global community is simply not yet ready in mindset or with the materials to implement the measures that have been employed. The only successful measures we know so far to contain COVID-19 as it has here in China,
which Xi Jinping proudly declares eradicated the virus from the entire nation of China. Schwab writes that countries fared better during the pandemic when they share a real sense of solidarity, favoring the common good over individual aspirations and needs. Support for these concepts is not a new feeling for Schwab. This did not spring organically out of the pandemic for him, like an epiphany. Rather, this is his long-held vision of utopia and his life's work. He's been talking about it for decades.
We just had Copenhagen. We had many other events in 2009 which clearly showed that the present system of global cooperation is not working sufficiently. One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
We need a different economic model. Just look to what happens in Davos, and just look to what happens on television. The agenda of Davos is taken over by practically everybody, whether it is the television, the papers, the public debate. So what Klaus has established is an agenda-setting forum.
COVID-19, if anything, has accelerated this ongoing industrial revolution. If COVID had happened even 10 years ago, we could not have imagined moving entire companies, schools, and government offices so fast online. Today, that is a reality. The fourth industrial revolution has become a reality.
Earlier this year, Schwab told the Financial Times that his aim has been to beat back Friedman. What was, for me, always disturbing was that Milton Friedman gave a moral reasoning to shareholder capitalism. He argued the role of business was to make business earn as much as possible, and then the money would flow back from the company to the government in the form of taxes. I had to fight against the wave. In short, Schwab and company are on a mission. The mission is to change society. They admire China's and New Zealand's governance. They practiced for a pandemic. Science has been thrown to the wind for months. Censorship is rampant. Sweden and Florida are ignored. The rule of law is suspended. And certain governors seem determined never to release us from their declared state of emergency. These circumstances are favorable to Schwab and his powerful allies, including technology companies, billionaires, the media, China, the UN, and others. They are detrimental to billions of less powerful, less organized people and small businesses. There is a lot we don't know because we aren't being told.
Climate change is indeed, for me, the defining issue of our time. For the first time in the history of humankind, there is a limit, a physical limit to our perspectives of development. And this has led humankind to declare a war to nature, and nature is striking back in a very violent way, as we have seen in different parts of the world. Now, it is absolutely essential to recognize that climate change is an existential threat to us all, and that climate change is running faster than what we are. We are not winning this war, and we absolutely must do it.
This is not a time for pessimism. This is a time for optimism. Fear and doubt is not a good thought process, because this is a time for tremendous hope and joy and optimism and action. But to embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. They are the heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers, and I have them, and you have them, and we all have them. And they want to see us do badly, but we don't let that happen. They predicted an overpopulation crisis in the 1960s, mass starvation in the 70s, and an end of oil in the 1990s. These alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives. We will never let radical socialists destroy our economy, wreck our country, or eradicate our liberty. America will always be the proud, strong, and unyielding bastion of freedom. In America, we understand what the pessimists refuse to see: that a growing and vibrant market economy focused on the future lifts the human spirit and excites creativity strong enough to overcome any challenge by far.
Schwab and his ideologically aligned allies seem to think that they are saving the world. It is not conspiracy theory to read their own books and listen to their own words, which target fundamental liberties and rights that the West has long taken for granted. At some point, it's not unreasonable to observe that this is no longer about public health. It's about a new political vision, one hatched by a private few in order to rule over the many. It is unlikely to be shared by most people, thus setting up what is likely to be an epic battle in the future.
Has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change. Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs.
But this moment also gives us a much greater chance to be radical and to do things differently, to build back better.
As lockdowns have been enforced to slow the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been unexpected benefit. In the face of global challenges posed by climate change, air pollution, social and economic inequalities, and the ongoing pandemic, we have a chance to build back better. The WHO Manifesto for a Healthy and Green Recovery to COVID-19 provides a prescription for a better normal. Now is the time to rethink how we organize our societies.
In order to meet the challenges of today, we can't just build back the way things were before. We have to build back better.
We cannot let this crisis become a lost opportunity.
Humanity also faces the threat of climate catastrophe.
The recovery plans must be sustainable, climate neutral, and climate resilient. We must recover better.
With transforming our economy to make it sustainable.
We need to act
to really build back better, and to turn this tremendous challenge into a fabulous opportunity for our country. Canadians have done such a terrific job in fighting the coronavirus so far. I'm really, really proud of our country, and I am absolutely confident that working together, we can get through this, and we can build back a country even better than the one we had before the pandemic hit us. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question in the foyer here.
Better.
We will build back better from the COVID crisis. Better, stronger, with an answer to the many challenges New Zealand already faced. This is our opportunity.
As the Prime Minister has said before, I mean, there is a health crisis, but that doesn't mean that the climate crisis is going away.
We still have another crisis. It's called climate change. And also, how do you build back better?
Because of the COVID-19 and the need to recover our economies, we are spending trillions of dollars at the present moment. So if we are spending trillions of dollars, let's do it in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Let's do it in line with the Agenda 2030. Let's rebuild our economies better.
So the Vice President took the approach of saying, we're not just going to try to plaster over the cracks and put some props in where it's falling apart. His approach was to say, we're going to build it back better.
What have we learned? How do we improve? And how do we build back better?
Some would say to build back better. We would say to really have a great reset.
Thank you, Klaus, and thank you to the World Economic Forum.
Thank you, Brother Heretic.